In our last session, we have seen an example of custom filters in AngularJS. In this session, we will see what is validation in AngularJS. First of all, let me tell you that what is validation. I'm going to bank, and I'm going to bank at 2 o'clock, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's a valid time entry for me to enter to go through a bank and to do my stuff. So if I will go to bank at 9 o'clock, so I'm not allowed to go at 9 o'clock. You could say that's 9 p.m. in the night. So it's not allowed for anyone to go to bank at 9 p.m. They have some certain rules. So basically validation is something like a certain amount of rules which applies. Okay, so similar to that, we can have our own validation. Suppose in my application I have many things, like I have a form, I have a student registration form. So in my registration form I have many fields like first name, surname, last name, date of birth, addresses. So when user goes and try to enter his name or her name as 1234, so it's not allowed, it's not acceptable, because we all know that name always will be in alphabetical order, like it would be always in A to Z, not in numbers. Okay, so these kind of things we can handle from our client side. So we have to put some rule on that text box that user can only enter the alphabets only, not numbers. So this is a kind of validation what we are going to apply on that text box. So once I am done with the validation, user won't be able to allowed to write numbers into the name field, into my first name or surname or last name. So this is a validation. Okay, so similar to this, there are many fields where we can perform these type of validation, like in my age. Suppose I am writing age like XYZ, so it doesn't mean anything. Okay, so it has to be a number. So this is a validation. Okay, validation for age. Similarly to that, I will put validation on email field. Suppose I have some email text box. I have that text box where you have to put your email name. So if you'll write there ABC and you will say that I'm done with my email name, so it's invalid. All we know that email always contains @ So we will put some rule, we will put some validation on that field, that user has to write the correct email format. Okay, so in this way there are many things where user can enter their values, and we will allow them to enter only validated value, not invalid. So these are the validation kind of things when we develop any application, any project. So we always keep in mind that our validation part should be clear. So in AngularJS, what happens, it provides its own validations. We all know that HTML has its own validation. HTML5 also provides its validation, but when we are doing some projects in AngularJS, so we will always go for AngularJS. We'll see that how the facilities are given by AngularJS. So if it is giving us a facility of validation far better than your normal HTML, then why will not choose this? So always we will go for the validation in AngularJS. So it's a very easy as compared to your traditional validation pattern. So we will see that how AngularJS validation happens and what it provides, and how to achieve that, how to implement that in our real life programming or in our applications. So AngularJS provides you 3 types of validation. I mean that in 3 ways, in 3 levels, you can check validation or you can put validation. So what are those? The first is input and form validation. The second one is directive validation, and the third one is through CSS validation. Okay, by CSS class. Okay, so by applying class you can also achieve the validation. Okay, so these are the 3 levels of AngularJS validation. So first of all, we will see that input and form state, through input and form state. So when I'm saying that through input and form state, what does it mean? That a validation which is valid for your input element, like your text box, your drop down, your radio button, your text area. So that is your input states, okay, and the second one is that is form state. So input and form state, okay. The form state is, suppose in a single form there are various elements, so all the elements and form together, their states is different from input state, okay. So there are two types of states. First is form state and second one is input state. So input element reside within a form that has their own states, that is called input state, and the form itself, which with their input elements, with their different elements, have their own states. So these are two states, like input state and form state. So the validation can happen through input state as well as the form state. So when you perform validation through input states, it provides its various validation functions through which you can achieve that. So what are those? It provides you the variable through which you can check the how my validation is going to happen. So this is like dollar $pristine, dollar $touched, dollar $untouched, dollar $valid, dollar $invalid. These are for input state, okay. So for input state it provides these types, okay, dollar $invalid, dollar $valid, dollar $touched, dollar $untouched, dollar $dirty, dollar $pristine. So these are also provided for your form as well. So for form, when you are dealing with form, so that form also have their own valid, invalid, touched, untouched, pristine and dirty states. So these are the states of your input and your form of your application, okay. So what are the functions of these state? Like when I'm saying that I'm doing validation for dollar $touched, dollar $untouched, what does it mean? So when I'm using dollar $touched, so what it exactly do that? It says that whether that element is touched or not. You mean that element has visited or not. So this is the function of touched, dollar $touched, and similar to the name suggests, that is untouched. So it's obviously at the opposite of that, means it is not touched, it hasn't been touched a single time even. So that is called untouched state, okay. So what happens when you apply touched and untouched? It provides you the boolean value, you know. When it is touched, if it is true, it will provide you true. If it is not touched, it will provide you false. So the message which comes, that depends on these states. So if someone enters something in text box, then it would be considered as touched. If someone doesn't enter anything, doesn't click on that input element, it would be considered as untouched. So this is touched and untouched. Similar to that, we have dollar $valid, dollar $invalid. So what does dollar $valid means? Suppose in my text box I have written something, and that's a valid value for that particular text box. So that in that case, if I have written the proper value for that text box, so it will show that dollar $valid against that dollar $valid, it will show me the true value, means it's fine. So in that case, that dollar $valid will return true. So suppose I have written something beyond the expectation, something which is not valid for that particular text box, then at that case it will return me false for that valid. Similar to this, we have dollar $invalid, okay. So suppose I have a text box and I have written some invalid content on that text box. So at that case, what it will do is it will return me true. Yeah, if some invalid content I have written, then it will display that true. It will display the true message. It will display the true value. So by that I can understand that yeah, there is something invalid characters or invalid things happens. Validation has not performed as well. So this is about touched, untouched, valid and invalid. So let's come to the case dollar $pristine and dollar $dirty. So when I am using dollar $pristine and dollar $dirty, so what does it mean? That when I am using dollar $pristine means that element has not been modified, okay. So this is the case of dollar $pristine, and dollar $dirty means that element has been modified. So in that case it will count that as a $dirty is true. Okay, so in this way these are the states for input elements. Okay, so all these also holds true for your form element. Suppose I'm applying the same things on the basis of form, then also it will do the same things, like whether my form is having value or not, whether the form is edited or not, whether the form is touched or not. So these things also applied on form level as well. So the states are for input and form, so that's why it is called input and form states. Okay, so the second one you can see that the second one is through directive. So through directive also we can validate, like the Angular directive itself provides you a functionality through which you can validate your input element or your form element. So how to achieve that? So for that reason what you need to do is you have to use that some inbuilt directives for that validation. So there are many directives present for validation. These are like you can use your mean length, max length, pattern. So this is ng pattern, ng mean length, ng max length, require. So these are the your inbuilt validation directives. Through this only you can achieve the validation. You can apply validation on your form or on your input elements. So the only difference is that how to achieve this. So the methods are little different for input and form states, and for directive validation, and for CSS class. So one by one we will see how to achieve this validation through these steps. Okay, so the first, what I said, that input and form, in that case what we will do, we have our form. So we have the name of the form, then inside the form we have the element like input type is equal to text, name is equal to xyz, and ng model is equal to xyz. So in this case what you have to keep in your mind that your name and your ng model, the value of these two should be same, then only you can fire the validation on the on your input element, on your form element. So the syntax is very simple, like you can apply through the form element that ng, suppose I have. So how to handle that, how to show that validation message, that I will show you in my example. In my next session I will be showing you the example for that. So for the time being, you just keep in your mind that we use that name property, the value of that name and the value of that form name. So these two are important to use the input and form states for validation. So this is for that. And now the second one is your directive validation. Directive validation is also performed in same manner. Your form element name, the name of their form dot your that element, and then we use $error. So up to this is same. Okay, so your form name, your input name, and then $error. So this $error part is new for using directive validation. Okay, then you apply your directive which are present for applying for using that validation, like ng mean length, max length, or pattern, etc. Okay, the third one is that is CSS class. So in CSS class what happens, that since we have different states of for input as well as for form, so depending on those states you can provide the styles. Suppose I have a touched state, untouched, valid, invalid, pristine, and dirty. So I can provide the exactly the style for that state only. Suppose whenever that touched happen, so I will display something, or I will I will set some styles, and that will occur on that particular state only. So that is done like form. I will write that form dot $pristine, $touched, $untouched, or you could say that input dot $pristine, $dirty, and then my styles which I am providing. So all these things, how to achieve these, how to apply these in your program, and how to validate your form and your input controls, I will show you in my next session, that how to perform in a single program. So you would be able to understand that how exactly we can achieve a validation in AngularJS. So friends, we have seen that is validation in AngularJS. In our next session, we will see an example of how to use touched and $untouched states of AngularJS.